I'm just going for a second to close the door so that there won't be noise from the background, okay?
Okay, well, we're on now, so that's totally fine, but welcome everybody who's here on Facebook watching us. We are here for another episode of the Oral Talmud. I'm Dan Liebenson, and here with B'nai Lappi. And we are absolutely thrilled today to be welcoming our guest, who is about to arrive. He's actually here, but closing a door to make it a little more quiet. Professor Daniel Boyarin, and we tend to give only a short introduction on these video shows, and then we'll have a longer version of the introduction on the podcast version of this. But Daniel Boyarin is the Herman P. and Sophia Taubman Professor of Talmudic Culture in the Departments of Near Eastern Studies and Rhetoric at the University of California at Berkeley, and the author of many articles, of course, and many books on the Talmud, including some of the ones that I have in front of me here, such as A Traveling Homeland, The Babylonian Talmud as Diaspora, and Borderlines, the Partition of Judeo-Christianity, and other books that I don't have right in front of me, including Carnal Israel, Socrates, Fat Rabbis, and many, many others. So
Unheroic Conduct.
So we've got them all between the two of us that are around here, and so really it's a great honor to have you on and to be able to talk to you about the Talmud and to hopefully have your ideas about the Talmud help our listeners, our watchers, really kind of get a deeper understanding of what the Talmud fundamentally is. So first of all, thank you so much for being with us and welcome.
Well, it's a pleasure. Anytime anybody says it's an honor to meet me or an honor to have me on their show, I get worried. I'd much rather that it be a pleasure. So,
well, it's a pleasure for sure. I thought that we could just get started with an idea. Like, I think that fundamentally, a lot of what B'nai and I are doing on this show is actually learning parts of the Talmud together and thinking about what was going on. But then we're also trying to talk to experts and scholars of Talmud to try to drive into this question of fundamentally, what is the Talmud? You know, what is it trying to be? And in particular, you know, one of your book that I mentioned, the idea of the Talmud as a diaspora, as a traveling homeland, felt to me like, well, that's a way of describing the Talmud that I think most people wouldn't think, you know, they say, well, it's a book, it's discussions, it's whatever, but the idea that it's a traveling homeland, I think that actually is really helpful in driving into this question of like, what are we even dealing with? So could you talk a little bit about what you mean by that and what you were trying to do?
I'll be glad to. My screen just did something. Okay, all right, good. I'm particularly invested and involved in that right now, since I'm writing a kind of a follow-up book at this time. So I'll share some of the ideas from the follow-up book as a way of getting into talking about the Talmud. There's a very famous formulation that is famous among critical theorists, historians, etc. So, you know, like sometimes the Tosfot from the 13th century will say about a piece of Talmud, the whole world asks about this piece of Talmud, right? The whole world is the 300 French and Franco-German rabbis in their community. So the whole world talks about this definition, namely the 3,000 people who think about such things at this time, of the word nation, of the concept nation. I'm talking about Benedict Anderson's famous definition of a nation as an imagined community, right? An imagined community. By that he means that both historically in terms of the formation of nations, which was generally a lot more recent than we think, right? Being a product essentially of the early modern period, 16th century, 17th century, 18th century, and then of course the newer nations that came into being in the 19th and 20th centuries, that one starts out with what we might call real community. And this is not a value judgment. I'm just using it as a cipher for what I want to talk about. That is the face-to-face community. Let's call it the village, the neighborhood, the valley, the little valley that we live in which we essentially know the people, and the sense of community is built up out of the interactions, economic, family, sexual interactions that take place between the people who live in this relatively or tiny or small, at any rate, face-to-face community. Now, what constitutes the nation is a kind of imagining of those relationships beyond the possibility of face-to-face interactions, right? So first our village, then our valley gets extended to the next valley over, and then gradually we end up with La France, for instance. Again, something that took place much, much later than our imaginations generally would have us imagine. Italy, the same, right? People from Sicily still don't, will talk about Italy as something other than Sicily. You know, they'll say things like, I'm going to Italy for my vacation, right? Or that Italian is not the language that they speak. They speak Siciliano or Veneziano, and Italian is that, you know, that official language. So that sense of the nation as an imagined community is a very, very powerful analytic explanation for nations. And the book has had Benedict Anderson, I remind you the name of the author, has had a tremendous impact on thinking about nations for the last decade since it was published. My conception of the Jews is that the Jews is a nation also. Right? I say the Jews is, which drives my potential publisher crazy, because I'm not talking about individual Jews. I'm talking about the Jews as a concept, the Jews as a whole thing, right? The Jewish nation is what I would say, but I don't want to put that into my title, as it were, because that's the goal of my analysis. So I can't assume it in the beginning. So that the Jews is also an imagined community, but a community imagined in time and not in space. Right? So I knew my Bubbas and my Zaydis. I didn't know anybody of any generations earlier. Some people, of course, have grandparents or even great-grandparents. But I had a connection with them as real people, right? Just as, by my analogy, the people in a village have connections with people that they see from the village. And somehow both the affect and a lot of the content of my emotional life is driven by that connection with my parents, my grandparents, and people of that generation. I imagine that further, or that emotional commitment and identification gets extrapolated, just as it does in France or Italy in space. It gets extrapolated in time, such that I imagine back further ancestors. Our family happens to be descended on one side from the Vilna Gaon, so I feel very connected with the Lithuanian Talmudic tradition. On the other side, my family is connected, goes back to very central Lubavitch figures, right? So it's no wonder I'm mixed up, right? How Lubavitcher and how Litvak, it's a little confusing sometimes. I dealt with it for many years by simply denying the Hasidic connection, but not anymore. As I get older, Lubavitch, Chabad looks more and more attractive to me in many ways. So that sense of imagined, a community imagined in time, we conceive of in the present as horizontal connections with people, but we're not connected to those people necessarily in space, right? They could be in Morocco, in Israel, Palestine, in Greece, in London, in Vienna, in Berlin, but I'm connected with them in the ways that that we recognize as being profoundly moving for people, right? I mean, we make a joke of the people who open up the Jewish newspaper, and it says plane crashes over the Atlantic, 4 Jewish names among the God forbid the dead, or something of that sort, right? That's a kind of extreme and caricatured version, a reductio ad absurdum. But many Jews do feel that if something bad happens to Jews, or if Jews do something bad, that we are implicated in it, right? So that is a deep. I claim for myself, but by extrapolation, I think it is the source of a great deal of collective power. And by power, I don't mean political power. I don't mean power over. I mean power to do things in the world. Because it's oriented towards the past, the living contact with the past, with the Jewish past, with the shared Jewish past, with those Jews in Tangiers and in Athens and Stockholm, and everywhere else, is fed best, I think. I'm convinced of this, actually, by shared doings, practices in the present as well. Right? Now, note, I'm not talking about religion, right? I have nothing against religion. I'm an observant Jew myself. I used to call myself Orthodox. I'm not so sure I'm Orthodox. Heterodox might be better. Certainly not unorthodox, as in the sense of that annoying film. But I'm not. I don't want to, and I'm unable to shut this down in a little box called religion. When you shut things down and put them into little boxes, it becomes very easy to just let them go down the drain. Right? This notion of Jewishness, and I will not talk about Judaism, I will talk about Yiddishkeit or Jewishness, or actually lately I'm thinking about calling it Jewishkeit instead of a Yiddish word, a sort of portmanteau loan word into English, is much more expansive than the notion of a religion, particularly since when we talk about religions, we tend to talk about, we even use it as a synonym, faiths, right? What's faith got to do with it? Faithfulness, yes, but faith, that's goyim nachas, right?
And so how do you think that so how do you put the Talmud in this context? You know,
I'm
what was
just about to get there.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I'm just about to get there. So for me, in my experience, and I'm not only talking about my own personal experience, which I might be encouraged to talk about later if you want, but my experience of students, my experience of communities, my experience of interacting with groups of Jews from very, very different backgrounds, very different situations in life, very different orientations towards religion, is that the Talmud itself is a kind of representation, not only a representation, but almost an actualization of Jewishkeit. It's not a religious book in the way that Lutherans might talk about a religious book. I say Lutherans just because Luther was, I think, the greatest genius that Christianity produced in the last 1,000 years, perhaps. A little chutzpahdik for me to say that, but I've done a fair amount of study. One page is talking about, it might be talking about God's throne in heaven. That sounds religious, and somebody who went and saw it. And the next page will be talking about what to do if you've got a cold, right? A third page will be raising the question of how do you deal with some, I don't know any other word, so pardon me, some shit on the floor on Shabbos. Another page giving advice on how to make money in business and what not to do. And then we're into stories about demons. So it's a kind of fullness of life that I think makes the Talmud so vivid, so alive, including for people who will not, don't want to, and need not accept the quote unquote religious strictures. Obviously, in some sense, it's more engaging, or even more engaging, when it also has that kind of direct impact. But it needn't. Right now in the world, more Jews are studying a page of Talmud every day than ever in history. and many of them are not people who would define themselves as Orthodox, live all kinds of lives, but are finding in the Talmud. There's a woman in London who draws a brilliant little drawing every day for the page.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow picks something out, and unfortunately I don't remember her name right now.
Oh, Draw Yomi is her
yeah,
drawing.
right. So this contact with this life and liveliness of our Bubbies and Zadis from 1500 years ago, more Zadis than Bubbies, but we'll talk about that in a little while also, because it can't be elided, right? The gender balance, but it can be thought about, it can be encountered. It's like, I think, a shot of adrenaline for the individual Jew, as well as for what I continue to call, and what my book will insist on, Mertzism. Mertzism is Litvak Yiddish for inshallah. In the nation of the Jews, the Jewish nation, as a diasporic nation, as a nation constituted in time and not in a particular space, and certainly not in a state. So that's why the Talmud as homeland is not just for me some sort of romantic statement of Allah Heinrich Heine, who first, I think, referred to the Torah as the portable homeland of the Jews, right? And I drew the image from there, but for me it has, I think, related, but also very, very different significance and signification, including a political, what's called political now, a political image for the Jewish future that is crucially centered around shared study, and particularly shared study of the Talmud.
And I think this image of us being connected as an imagined community across space is particularly rich and evocative for us right now, as we are all connected more than ever in a virtual community and not so much in physical space. But with the sticky on that, you know, as a queer person, when I encountered Talmud for the first time, things jumped out at me that my teachers weren't pointing out, but they were just so screamingly obvious. For example, what jumped out at me were the ways in which the rabbis were radically overturning Torah. And essentially what I saw was laying out a methodology for doing so. And that led to what might be an oversimplified characterization on my part of the Talmud as essentially a handbook for how to upgrade the tradition. So what I would love to ask you is, what did you see? What jumped out at you when you first learned Talmud that had to do with your life experience? If you could reflect on that, why did that jump out at you? And it occurs to me that who reads the Talmud is essential. You know, what you bring to the experience is really going to help you see what's been missed. You know, and as one of my other teachers, Shama Friedman, says, I looked at it and I saw things. And I think each of us, because of who we are and our life experience, is going to look at it and see different things. And that's why I'm particularly excited about people with very different life experiences finally coming to the table. So I'd love to know, what did you see? What did that have to do with you? And do you see a unified project in the Talmud? And do you think my characterization is even fair?
Okay, good. Those are wonderful questions, Benet. And first of all, I'm not sure that I'm pretty sure that folks watching this, at least a lot of folks who are ultimately going to be watching this, don't know that I grew up in a totally secular sort of leftish Zionist home, where connection to the Jewish people was very strong, but also very secular in its orientation. I grew up thinking you're not allowed to eat butter on Friday night, because although we ate treif the whole week, on Friday night my mother didn't put butter and meat on the table. You know, it was sort of a kind of memorial to the Shabbos and to the kashrus that she had known as a child, as a girl, right, growing up in an Orthodox home. So that sort of thing, which is a double-edged, right? Because it's both the rejection of the religion, but also a marker of very strong connection with the past in some way. So for me, my first encounter with the Talmud was actually at the Hebrew University in their introductory class, what they call the mechina, the preparatory class for the study of Talmud. The reason I found myself in that class altogether was I had gone to Israel as a junior in college with the idea that I was going to study Kabbalah, right? Because I was like much of my generation, very interested in mysticism, and this was supposedly Jewish mysticism, so I was going to go study the Zohar. I actually signed up for a class in the Zohar. And the first day I was in Israel, I went to the office of the Americans and Canadians in Israel because I needed help with orientation. And I happened, the person with whom I talked, and I never saw him again, I don't remember his name, but he had a big impact on my life because he was an Orthodox man in the Yarmulke. He said to me, "You want to study Zohar? Have you studied the Talmud?" I said, "No, I don't even know what the Talmud is. You know, I thought it was a commentary on the Torah. I had it confused with the Midrash or with Rashi." He said, "Well, you can't study Zohar if you haven't studied the Talmud. It makes no sense at all. So sign up for a Talmud class." So I signed up for a Talmud class. My very first impression of the Talmud was, or my very first feeling when I started studying the Talmud was, you're not in New Jersey anymore. You know, I'd never been to Kansas, so it wasn't. I felt that I had stepped into a world so magical, so exciting, so rich and vibrant and different from the not quite bourgeois. I don't think we had enough money to be bourgeois. Kind of suburban, rural existence that I'd grown up with in New Jersey.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I love the way
No,
you
go ahead.
the way you describe that experience as being charmed,
Yeah,
as you describe it in the full antique sense of that word.
yeah, no,
And I love
exactly.
that. And I know what you mean.
Yeah, good, great.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the only experience I'd had that was, or that year that was somewhat similar was the day after the 6-day war, right? So the seventh day, I went walking in the old city of Jerusalem for the first time, obviously. And again, I just felt I was in a different world. The shuk in those days was, it was like stepping. I'd never been to Istanbul. I'd never been to Cairo. Just stepping into that world in which the sounds were different, the smells were different, the sights were different. That's what stepping into the Talmud was like for me. It was just this magic world. Now, this would be a meaningless kind of statement if it were only me. Then it would be just something to write about in DSM 6, right? But I've experienced that over and over and over again with students, with people who are not students of mine, but encountered the Talmud this in different varieties. I don't think they'd use the same language or the same metaphors precisely. People come from different places, but of just feeling compelled by desire to keep studying. One of the more well-known Talmud scholars of the generation after me now, and I'm not going to mention names because I don't have permission to, but came to the United States to do a PhD on Martin Buber. She entered my Talmud class. Now, suffice to say that she never wrote a PhD on Martin Buber. She wrote a PhD on the Talmud, and as I say, she is one of the more well-known Talmud scholars of her generation today. So there is something that pulls, not everybody, but that pulls lots and lots of people in, and I had that experience of just being charmed, as you say, in the antique sense. It's as if a magic flute started playing somewhere, and life became colorful in ways that it hadn't been. I was not a depressed kid. I was happy, but just that sense of encounter, with something so different and yet so mine, right, at the same time, and then the sharing that led to, ultimately, as I did adopt with my family an observant life, became very, very involved in that. Even just loving the fact that at a Shabbos table with guests, we would talk about a passage in the Talmud and discuss it. And by the way, at least I can say that very quickly at our table there were men and women discussing the matter at hand. My 4-year-old son at the time, the the professor now. He wasn't the professor yet. At some point in a Friday night conversation, but he was signaling. And in the middle of a Friday night conversation, he just looked up and said, "But what does the Rambam say?" I don't think he had any idea what the Rambam was or who the Rambam was at that point, but he knew that that's the sort of thing that you say, and he's still asking that question as a professor. So this was all just like the addition of a dimension of effervescence, to use Durkheim's term, of deep liveliness and that sense of deep, powerful connection with the past. Now, and here B'nai is, when did I start questioning that without in any way withdrawing from it, was when I started teaching, when I came to the United States, and I started teaching women. All of a sudden, the questions of gender leaped out or leapt out. I mean, not that I'd been oblivious to them, but it's, when you have to address people, and so women, then a little bit later, queer folk. Since I teach in a state university, I also had non-Jews who came to study the Talmud. Another student of mine never became Jewish, and she is one of the absolute leaders of American Jewish scholarship.
And did you see in it any sort of coherent project, or is that no? Okay. Mm-hmm.
I saw in it an incoherent project.
I love
project of incoherence. And that is exactly the attraction, or a major source of attraction, is that it doesn't settle down to a well-wrought urn, right?
Yeah.
To misappropriate a term from the new critics.
Yeah.
It just doesn't settle. And it's that doesn't mean that there aren't walls and there aren't limits. Certainly within halacha, it's not anything goes, but a whole lot goes on the discursive level. Right? As a community, we've settled on certain practices, or several communities have settled on certain practices. I don't think there are any Jews who aspire to keeping the Torah, who eat chicken and cheese together, right? But discovering in the Talmud that one of our favorites, one of our culture heroes, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, insisted that chicken and cheese is perfectly kosher because chickens don't have milk,
right?
And it adds a dimension of incoherence and excitement that opens up a world of imagination, a world of shared imagination, a world of shared discourse and shared culture that I think, as I said, is a kind of lifeblood of circulation. So that's the kind of Jewish blood I'm prepared to talk about.
I love that. Let me ask you about this incoherent project. In the last 50 years or so, maybe a little about that. I think you can tell me the layer through the work of Shama Friedman and David Weiss Halivni and your own work and others, the layer of the editor has been brought out as actually having created the flavor of what the Talmud is and retrojecting its own ideas and values and taste for plurality and indeterminacy of truth back into the first generation of the Yavne era. So I'd love to hear you talk about what you see in this editorial layer.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. First of all, I find it deeply moving and worthy of homilies that arguably the most influential voices in the history of Jewish thinking are anonymous.
Yeah.
Right. There's something we say gadol, that there's a hierarchy of honorifics, so that there's Rav and Rabbi and Rabban, like Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, right? Or Rabban Gamliel, and then we say Gadol mi Rabban Shmo. Even higher than that is just a name without a title, right? For instance, someone like Shmuel, he's never called Rav Shmuel or Rabban Shmuel, and but I say even Gadol Mishmo is Stam.
So even greater than someone without a title is someone
someone
even without a name.
Right. And so that is what we might call the editorial voice. I think it's much more than editorial, and in the sense of what we think of as editorial. Redactor is by now a tainted word because redacted seems to mean censored or something, right? Which is not what it has historically meant, but that's what it means now. So we can't use the word redactor anymore. But those voices that actually took all the traditions that Dan was mentioning in the beginning in our conversation, everything that was in the middle between, shall we say, the Mishnah and whatever this production of the Talmud was, which is later than we used to think. We used to think like 4th, 5th century. Now it looks more like 6th century. Those voices are themselves not unanimous. They're not single, right? So that's the first thing we have to say. We can't talk about the editor or the redactor or the, we do tend to call it traditionally the Talmud. The Talmud says, right? But of course, the Talmud from tractate to tractate, or sometimes chapter to chapter, sometimes page to page, seems to shift. But in a broad characterization, one could say that that level of the Talmud manifests a certain kind of epistemology and a theory of knowledge or thinking about knowledge, in which knowledge and quote unquote truth are not available as absolutes, and so that the favoring of the desire for controversy and for controversy to go on forever, right? Machloket l'shem shamayim ein sofo litkayem, right? Machloket sheino l'shem shamayim ein sofo litkayem. But a controversy that is for the sake of heaven will perdure forever as a controversy, right? Even if all the Jews who live in certain parts of the world, or sometimes all the Jews who live in the whole world, settle down and decide in practice, so that we can all eat in each other's homes, right? A messianic aspiration. None of us will eat chicken with cheese, but Rabbi Yossi Aglili's voice, which was clearly a voice for the sake of heaven, remains forever, right? And that sense of hanging on to the unfinishedness, of knowledge, and my brother tells a story. He learned, my brother Jonathan learned for many years. He's still learning in Reb David Feinstein's, and let's pray for his health. He's very ill. Reb David Feinstein's yeshiva on the Lower East Side describes that there was one man who came there every day, beard, not payas probably, but the real thing, the real deal, not some hippie who was doing tshuva or something. And every once in a while, this man would get up and walk around and say, I don't know how often he said it, I don't do what God wants me to do. I do what I think God wants. Right?
Yeah.
That moment of, I'm going to call it humility, epistemological humility, has the potential to save millions of human lives. So,
wow.
And that's one of the virtues that I see in the Talmud, is that sense of unfinishedness. Yeah, go.
In your book, Borderlines, you talk about the possibility that, let me start in a different place. Dan and I are always asking ourselves, what was going on in 5th, 6th century Iraq that made this raising up of indeterminacy in the Talmud as it is possible or necessary, perhaps. And in Borderlines, you talk about the possibility, I'm not sure if I have you completely right here, that this indeterminacy and the Talmud's messaging of pluralism might have been a response actually to the dogma and simple single truth emphasis of Christianity. Was that a dynamic going on?
I don't think that's what I said then, and I certainly wouldn't say it now. I would say something else. That is
okay,
what
good.
I said then, I believe, I mean, you know better because you read the book more recently. But what I either said then or wish now that I had said then, or
I'm sure I misunderstood.
So
So
there was a kind of late antique collapse of epistemological certainty, that for which I have some evidence, but not a great deal. It's very, very hypothetical. That intellectuals around the Greek East almost lost faith in the possibility of discovering and proving the truth through rational argumentation, and so that this crisis in rational truth seeking has different effects. I mean, and one effect that in certain areas of the Christian world, the areas that became Orthodox Nicene type Christianity, especially, the idea of rational argumentation was discredited and replaced with notions of simple truth and revelation. You know, the simple, dirty monk who goes out in Nicaea after the arguments have not worked and just says, "I confess," and essentially says some version of the Nicene Creed, and then everybody just bends the knee. That's a kind of understandable response to such a crisis, and one that we find, for instance, in the story of Tanur Shalachnai, explicitly rejected, right? So in that sense, but both of these as responses to a kind of collapse of belief in seeking truth through rational argumentation. It's not entirely different, I think, from the moment in which we live now, right? In which some sense of the possibility of rational argumentation is in collapse, and it's in collapse for most people. And I mean, it doesn't. This doesn't distinguish between right and left in a sense. The responses may to that may differ, but that kind of a crisis is attendant also. And in that sense, the Talmud may help us in some ways as a model for ways of living with controversy, with antithetical opinions, even when these different opinions are deeply antithetical. Right?
One of the claims that I make is that the learning of Talmud actually makes us people who are better able to not only tolerate, but to really have an appetite and desire for holding contradiction. Do you think that's fair? Do you think it's making us, Talmud is making us those kinds of people?
Well, yes, but we have to recognize the limitations of that. First of all, we have to start out being, in a sense, being people for whom that is a value. Mm-hmm. And secondly, there are limits, of course. I mean, people talk about the Talmud as pluralist. It's not pluralist. It's that's not quite right. It certainly doesn't allow anybody to just walk in and express an opinion. There are conditions on who gets to express and who doesn't get to express, and that's one of the big critical critical issues that has to be dealt with in our imagining of the Talmud and the place of the Talmud. That's one point. And also there are limits to the sayable and unsayable. Right? The limits might be articulated by a figure like Elisha ben Abuya, right? As kind of the one who stepped beyond the bounds. I can't, of course, go into detail on the stories in this context, although perhaps if we have a study session sometime, we might take a look at some of that material as kind of the boundaries. there's a place in the Talmud, and unfortunately I don't have the reference offhand, but I've mentioned it, where a Galilean follower of Jesus named James, Yaakov, as they mostly seem to have been in those days in the 3rd century, expresses a halakhic opinion that makes a great deal of sense as an interpretation of a pasuk, of a verse in the Torah. And one of the Amoraim there said, well, if he were someone who comes in with us, then I would accept that opinion. Right? So that means that there are people who are beyond the bounds of expressing even an opinion that makes a great deal of sense, acceptability. So all of these things, what I don't like is the kind of blithe appropriation, and this is not something you do at all, Benay.
Thank goodness.
I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about certain other environments that I'm really doing pretty well with avoiding Lashon Hara for the most part. Which is actually one of my favorite sports, but I'm controlling it. That just, Talmud is pluralist, right? So everybody can come in and say, and no, first of all, in this world, you have to pay your dues before you can say. You have to study, you have to have a deep engagement with the tradition, and you have to know when you're stepping over the bounds. You can do that, right? It's an honorable position. It's called apikoros. But
right.
In order to be an apikoros, first you have to be deeply, deeply engaged. And that's what, and saying for years was a kind of bon mot that the Haredim, whether we like or don't like, or this position or that position, or the way they live, or whatever. And I think sometimes anti-Haredi is the modern Jewish version of anti-Semite, but that's another story. But they're necessary for the Jews. Why are they necessary for the Jews? Because they are our only reliable source of apikoros. Right?
Okay, I know we're running out of time, but there's something I really want to ask you, because I'm afraid I'm misusing an idea. I think when I quote you most often, I am repeating your phrase, finding a usable past.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope I'm not misunderstanding it. Can you tell us what you meant? And I think it was in the end of Cardinal Israel, when you talk about your project being, or one of your projects being, finding a usable past.
Yeah.
And how does that fit into the Talmud?
Yeah. First of all, I want to say that I don't mean just picking and choosing and saying, I like this, I don't like that, this fits. So, which is, that's not engaging with the past in any a serious way. What I mean is, I think, engaging so deeply and energetically in the past. And the past for me is emblematized by the Talmud. That that my judgments, even my judgments of when not to follow a certain commandment, or not to observe a certain prohibition, are, I'm not quite saying this right, and I don't feel that I'm getting it exactly, but you know, it's like I remember a certain, I think, early modern rabbinic figure from Eastern Europe who referred to a certain mitzvah, right? That we would find morally repugnant, right? Something on the order of if a certain undesirable person falls into a pit on Shabbos, we just leave them there and let them die, or something like that. And he said, "Mitzvah taseh she'ein mekaymin." This is a positive requirement of the law that we don't follow. You know, and we're not talking about, I'm not talking about a conservative rabbi. I'm not talking about reform within, you know, I mean, that's an extreme thing. We don't just go around and saying, I don't like this, I don't like the mikvah, so no more mikvah, I don't like this, right? But we find the tools to understand, to accept, to reject through, it's the assertion that it's mitzvah taseh.
That it's a requirement, that it's a commandment to dafka disobey. Mm-hmm.
Right, but we don't observe it, you know. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to say it better. That was not really very well said, I recognize, but it's partly because the idea itself is not fully formed. But
would it be, I think I'm understanding it better as I'm listening to you. Is it fair to say you don't mean hunt around for the pieces that you like and then put those together and say, right, this is what the tradition is? It's not that you find pieces, it's that you find within the entirety of the past a foundation which may have been missed by others, or that holds within it the morally virtuous, or I would say the traditionally radical, that you can stand on. Am I getting closer to it?
Yes, actually that was better than anything I said, so. Anyway.
I love this notion that the tradition has always been radical. It has always been saying to us, it's your obligation to violate the tradition when it violates your svar.
In some way, yeah, right. You know. So, Dan.
Oh yeah, so we're out of time. So I think that this is hopefully the first of many conversations, and we're just so grateful that you took the time to talk to us.
Sure. Okay. So
thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure for me. Nice to see you again, B'nai and Dan. And are you both in Chicago, or are you in two different places in the world?
We are both in Chicago, but these days it doesn't matter anymore.
Exactly. Right.
Right.
So,
we're all in the same place.
Yeah. Okay.
Daniel, thank you so much. To be continued, I hope.
Inshallah. Bye-bye.